For 47 years, Clint Eastwood was revered as an untouchable icon of American cinema, until Jasmine Crockett stood up and questioned the real cost of that legacy. She exposed how his films sidelined women and erased people of color, and she dared to speak about a lawsuit Hollywood buried for decades. The result? A national firestorm. Debates erupted, institutions backtracked, and the whole country was caught in a clash between old legends and hard truths. As Eastwood fell silent, Crockett rose and forced America to confront the legacy it's been celebrating for decades. What did Jasmine say that shook the system to its core? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blinding lights of Studio 14 at CBS headquarters, a glossy red carpet wound its way into a soundstage dressed like a shrine to nostalgia. Tonight's event, An American Legacy, honoring Clint Eastwood, was broadcast live to millions across the country. Brass trumpets played a slowed-down version of the good, the bad, and the ugly theme, while giant screens flashed through 6 decades of Eastwood's most iconic moments: the squint, the silent stare, the smoking barrel. Backstage, producers hustled to synchronize teleprompters, stage cues, and camera angles, whispering into headsets like field commanders preparing for war. But in the corner, away from the flurry of controlled chaos, Jasmine Crockett stood still, clutching the show's rundown packet, her brows low, jaw clenched. She had just read the segment notes: Clint Eastwood, voice of honor, defender of American values, model for generations of men. Her eyes narrowed. No mention of Sandra Locke. No mention of the lawsuits. Nothing about the lack of people of color in his 60-year canon of cinema. It was propaganda wrapped in gold foil. Jasmine had been invited as a young voice of public service. A decorative seat at the table meant to smile, nod, and not disturb the myth-making in progress. But she was not built for ornamental silence. And the moment she saw the producer's note that said, "Please keep remarks celebratory, no detours into politics or criticism," something inside her shifted, like a trigger being pulled, quietly. The host, an aging TV anchor in a velvet tuxedo, peeked backstage and waved at Jasmine, smiling like nothing was wrong. He didn't know what was coming. Jasmine's stilettos clicked slowly across the polished floor as she walked toward her cue spot. She passed a hallway lined with framed Eastwood movie posters: Pale Rider, Sudden Impact, American Sniper. Each image more drenched in myth than the last. 60 years, she murmured under her breath. 60 years of white men with guns being called justice. She wasn't here to ruin a man. She was here to break a silence. And if this stage was built to glorify the past, she'd make damn sure the future had a voice too. The silence that followed Jasmine's entrance wasn't peace. It was pressure, thick and suffocating, the kind that sits on your chest and dares you to breathe. Applause echoed like a script being followed too closely, artificial and airtight. She took her seat in the front row, feet planted firmly, spine straight like a blade, eyes never leaving the stage. She didn't belong to this room, not really. And everyone knew it. The chandeliers above glittered like the past clinging to itself, and every banner that hung behind the podium screamed of a version of America written by the same hands again and again. The stage lights dimmed, brass music flared, and then came the voice, deep, solemn, dramatic. Ladies and gentlemen, the legend himself, Mr. Clint Eastwood. The audience rose as one, a tidal wave of reverence. He walked out like a general on a battlefield he had already conquered. Slower now, older, but no less proud. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. His presence was the myth. When Clint reached the podium, he rested his weathered hands on either side, looked across the crowd with that trademark squint, and let silence stretch like leather in the sun. Then he began. "I come from a time," he said, voice low and gravelly, "when men didn't whine, they acted. When you could walk into a room and not explain yourself to anyone." Laughter bubbled up from the crowd. He nodded slightly as if affirming his own point. "Back then, we didn't need safe spaces. We had backbone. We built things. We didn't break down in front of cameras. We got up and fixed the damn problem. The audience clapped, eager to show they understood. He went on. America was stronger when it was simpler, when right was right and wrong got dealt with. A man's word was his contract, and his silence, his strength. Jasmine sat motionless, but fire moved beneath her skin. Her jaw clenched, her breath slowed like a sniper preparing for wind. That wasn't just nostalgia up there. It was a subtle rebuke, a coded dismissal of everything she stood for. His words weren't harmless. They were a sermon for the old gods of power, and she had heard their voice in too many courtrooms, too many back rooms, too many moments where injustice wore a polished suit and a confident smile. Clint wasn't just reflecting, he was rewriting, and everyone was clapping like it was gospel. A camera operator, maybe guided by instinct more than instruction, panned for just a heartbeat away from the stage, to her. Jasmine's eyes were fixed forward, face like marble, but in the sharpness of her glare was a scream. She didn't need a mic. Her expression sliced through the air, through the show, through the myth. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her grip tightened around the armrest like it was a lever to pull the fire alarm. Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, sliced through the fog of sentimentality Clint was conjuring. This wasn't nostalgia, it was erasure in a tuxedo. The camera operator, perhaps sensing the electricity in the air, shifted lens focus away from Clint for a beat and panned, just briefly, to Jasmine. In that moment, her expression said everything. The disapproval, the disbelief, the disgust wrapped in diplomatic stillness. Twitter caught it. Within seconds, the screen grab of her stare began circulating with captions like, "That look just cracked Mount Rushmore," and "Jasmine knows." She wasn't trying to steal the moment. But when injustice is wrapped in applause, silence is complicity. And her silence was already speaking louder than Clint's entire speech. The moment her eyes met his across the stage, something ancient cracked, like the floorboards of an old Western saloon, splitting under the weight of truth. The applause from Clint's speech hadn't fully faded when the announcer's voice returned, this time gentler, almost cautious. And now a few words from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. A ripple of polite claps moved across the room, respectful, restrained, the kind reserved for someone whose name is known, but whose presence still makes people shift in their chairs. Jasmine rose slowly, not for drama, for clarity. Her movements were deliberate, like someone stepping into a courtroom, not a celebration. Her hand clutched a single sheet of cream-colored cardstock, the speech she'd been given, the one carefully crafted to say everything and nothing all at once. She walked toward the podium with the kind of grace that comes not from being welcome, but from knowing exactly why you're not. Her heels echoed against the glossy stage, each strike a measured beat in a room suddenly too quiet. She reached the microphone, placed the folded speech neatly on the podium, then adjusted it with the gentle precision of someone who had prepared for this, but not in the way anyone expected. She stared down at the page. Her fingers hovered, hesitated. The air tightened. For a second, it looked like she might read it. Play her part. Keep the balance. Keep the silence. But then, without a word, she lowered the page, folded it in half, and placed it beside her like something dead. She lifted her gaze. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice steady but heavy, like someone lifting something too long buried. "I came here tonight prepared to honor your legacy." The first sentence sat politely on the air. Well-mannered, diplomatic, the kind of sentence expected at an event like this. But then her tone shifted. "I watched 17 of your films in the past month." 17. Her eyes didn't waver, her voice didn't rise, but the room tensed, like it knew something sacred was about to be challenged. "I came in curious. I left exhausted." A quiet cough somewhere in the audience. A camera lens adjusted, zooming in. "Because in 17 films," she continued, slower now, words sharpened with precision, "I didn't find one woman who wasn't broken, or silent, or there to soften the edge of a man's anger. Not one who got to lead the scene, not one who wasn't touched, threatened, killed, or cast aside so that a man could rise in her place." A shiver rippled through the studio. The live broadcast kept rolling. The producers in the control room froze. No one dared cut away. She paused, eyes never leaving Clint's. That's not cinema. That's a pattern. That's a message dressed in dust and gunpowder. And I have to ask, her voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Is that the legacy you want to leave behind? A world where justice is white, male, and always holding a gun? No one moved. No one breathed. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Like every syllable had been earned, not written. There was no malice in her voice, only weariness and certainty. The kind that doesn't seek applause, only truth. Clint's face didn't change, but his silence did. It wasn't the silence of confidence anymore. It was the silence of someone realizing, for the first time, he might not be the hero of his own story. And still, Jasmine stood there, not as a disruptor, not as a protester, but as someone who had carried the weight of being written out of stories for far too long, and who now finally refused to sit quietly at the edge of someone else's legend. The room didn't just fall silent, it braced. Jasmine's last words hung in the air like a blade suspended mid-fall, and no one dared breathe, as if even oxygen might shatter the illusion still clinging to the walls. Eyes darted between Clint and Jasmine. Some leaned forward, others looked down, already uneasy. The event meant to celebrate a legend had tilted into something else entirely, something raw, unscripted, dangerously true. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She wasn't here for a headline. She was here for the reckoning. And when she spoke again, it wasn't louder, but colder, more precise, like a scalpel meeting old scar tissue. She took one breath. No notes, no pause, only purpose. And I have to wonder, she said, her voice now heavy with unsaid names and untold stories, if a man who once stood in court, accused by a woman he lived with for forcing not one, but 2 abortions, can claim to tell the truth in his films, or just rewrite it to his comfort. A sharp gasp sliced through the room. Several heads turned toward the production booth. One intern stumbled over a headset cord, frozen mid-movement. Clint didn't blink, but his jaw tensed. She had said what no one else in Hollywood had dared whisper near a microphone in 3 decades. Jasmine didn't need to name Sandra Locke. She didn't have to. Every person over 40 in that room already remembered the lawsuit, the headlines, the settlement, the silence that followed. The air grew colder. What had been framed as reverence was now exposed as protection, a protection built on the backs of women told to stay quiet, to keep the myth intact. Jasmine stood steady, like she'd been preparing her whole life for this exact moment. Her gaze didn't waver, not even when the producer in the wings began motioning furiously for her to wrap it up. But she wasn't finished. The cameras were still rolling, and for the first time in a long time, they were catching not a performance, but the truth, undiluted, from the mouth of someone who had spent her career peeling back layers of silence in rooms like this one. Rooms built to celebrate the powerful, rooms never designed for her voice to be heard. And yet, there she stood, refusing to be edited, refusing to be polite, refusing to let the myth win. The air in the room no longer moved. It hung, stale and electric, like the moment before lightning hits the ground. Jasmine's words had settled not like an echo, but like a verdict. Her tone didn't shake. It didn't rise to meet the tension. It controlled it, the way a seasoned litigator commands a courtroom. Sandra Locke, she said, slow and deliberate, like each syllable weighed 100 pounds. Some of you in this room know her name. Most of you were told to forget it. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not to accuse, but to remind. She was his partner for over a decade, in life, in film, until one day she wasn't. Jasmine stepped half an inch closer to the mic, not for effect, but for focus. She sued him, not just for financial abuse, not just for betrayal, but because he used his power to erase her, to silence her career, to silence her voice, and to make sure she could never work again in this town. The room wasn't just quiet, it was locked. Producers backstage were no longer waving for her to rap. It was like they couldn't even lift their arms. The audience had shifted from polite listeners to frozen witnesses. And Clint Eastwood, the man whose name had been spoken with almost religious reverence just 15 minutes earlier, was now under a lens far sharper than any camera. But the camera was there. It didn't blink. It didn't cut away. It zoomed in, slowly and steadily, until the entire nation saw the face of a man hearing a truth he'd buried for 30 years. Now spoken with surgical clarity by a woman who refused to lower her voice. His face didn't flinch in the theatrical way moviegoers know. No raised eyebrow, no sly grin, no practiced response. But his jaw tightened, just barely. A single muscle in his cheek twitched. His eyes didn't meet hers. And in that stillness, America saw what it had never been allowed to see. The cost of protecting legends without questioning them. Jasmine didn't gloat. Her face held no trace of revenge. Only history finally laid bare. Sandra Locke wasn't a subplot, she continued, this time her voice dipping lower. She was a woman, a creator, a voice. She was written out of the story not because she wasn't talented, but because she wouldn't stay silent. That line didn't land like applause. It landed like a confession. But it didn't belong to Jasmine. It belonged to the industry, to every producer who chose convenience over truth, to every audience who cheered the myth and ignored the cost. Clint still hadn't spoken, still hadn't moved, and Jasmine let the silence speak for him because she knew it was finally his turn to sit in the story, not write it. For a long, simmering second, Clint Eastwood said nothing. The room waited, half of it holding its breath in discomfort, the other half in anticipation. The tension wasn't cinematic anymore. It was real, and it was thick, and it was heavy. Then slowly, Eastwood shifted in his seat, not with the grace of a humbled man, but with the slow calculation of someone preparing to reclaim the room. He reached for the mic, adjusted it with one hand and leaned in. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It was cold, bone dry, and soaked in condescension. "I didn't come here tonight to be lectured by a politician," he said, each word clipped, deliberate, honed like a blade, "who hasn't lived long enough to understand what this country really is." It was a sentence that didn't just push back, it punched. Not with facts, not with humility, but with a tone so soaked in generational disdain that it felt like watching an old gate slam shut in real time. The gasp in the room wasn't theatrical, it was instinctive. People flinched. Even some of the more seasoned guests in the front rows straightened in their chairs. Jasmine didn't flinch, but she didn't need to. The insult wasn't subtle, and it wasn't designed to be. Clint went on, his voice still steady, his eyes sharper now. "You represent a generation that confuses feelings with facts, a generation that sees offense in every corner and injustice in every mirror." He paused just long enough to let the contempt settle like dust across the stage. "You build your platform on outrage, on victimhood, on calling everything oppression just because it doesn't flatter you." A few faint claps sparked from the back of the room, isolated, hesitant, but the sound died before it could gain momentum. Clint continued anyway. "But outrage doesn't build anything. It doesn't fix roads. It doesn't hold a family together. It sure as hell doesn't make a country strong. What does? Grit, backbone. The kind we had. The kind your generation traded in for hashtags and safe spaces." He wasn't shouting, but he didn't have to. Every word was delivered like a verdict, wrapped in a smirk, coated in the confidence of someone who had spent decades being untouchable. And yet, for all its swagger, something deeper began to show. An almost desperate need to reassert the rules of a game that no longer belonged entirely to him. Because this wasn't a movie set, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't reading from a script. She had broken through the frame, stepped past the curtain, and spoken a truth too sharp to be ignored. His words, as calculated as they were, carried the weight of a man clinging to a version of the world where people like him didn't have to explain themselves, and people like her weren't allowed to question them. Jasmine didn't respond. Not yet, but she didn't need to. The silence between them became a war of wills, and for once, Clint's silence didn't feel powerful. It felt defensive. He had fired back. But this wasn't one of his films where the last man speaking was automatically the one who won. The cameras were still rolling, and this time, the audience wasn't watching a hero deliver his final monologue. They were watching something older struggle to breathe in a room that had finally, painfully, begun to change. And just as the echo of Clint's last words began to fade into the charged quiet of the room, a voice crackled through Jasmine's earpiece, tight, anxious, practiced. "Congresswoman Crockett," the producer said, almost whispering, but with an edge of command, "please, we're asking for calm now. Please keep it respectful. Recenter the tone. Bring it back to the tribute." It was not a suggestion. It was a directive, cloaked in diplomacy, dressed in corporate softness, but built from the same old machinery of control. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She stood just off stage, fingers grazing the curtain's edge, eyes fixed on the dim outline of the audience through the stage lights. Her chest rose, once, then again, not with nerves but with resolve. Behind her, another assistant approached, a young woman, clipboard in hand, voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am," she said, "they really want to move on. Just a closing note of unity, if possible. Something warm." Her eyes said the rest. "Please don't make it worse. Please don't ruin the show." Jasmine turned to face her, not with anger, but with something heavier. Truth, history, fire held in check by years of being asked to wait your turn. Her voice was calm, steady, and low. "If I stay quiet now," she said, "I'm not keeping peace. I'm maintaining a lie." The assistant blinked. Jasmine stepped closer. Her voice didn't rise, but her words hit like thunder. "If I choose politeness in this moment, I am choosing to betray every woman who was ever told her discomfort was less important than a man's legacy. I am betraying every actress who lost a job for saying no. Every assistant who was told to smile through the hand on her back. Every survivor who watched their abuser win an award and then had to clap for him like it was normal." She looked beyond the assistant, toward the curtain, toward the cameras, toward the silence waiting to be cracked open again. "This isn't about disrespect," she said. "This is about finally refusing to disappear." No one moved. The assistant swallowed hard, lowered her clipboard, and stepped back without a word. The producer didn't call again. And for a few rare seconds, the machine, this finely tuned apparatus built to smooth out bumps, silence disruption, and manufacture reverence, went still. Jasmine stood at the edge of the light, the murmur of the crowd seeping in like pressure through the walls. She thought of Sandra Locke, of the women whose names she knew, and the countless ones she didn't. She thought of all the green rooms where apologies were made in private and careers were buried in silence. And she knew this was why she was here. Not to comfort the powerful, not to decorate the program, but to break the frame. When she stepped back into the spotlight, it wasn't as a participant. It was as a woman refusing to be footnoted in someone else's story. The moment Jasmine stepped off the stage, the room didn't just buzz, it detonated. The applause was fractured, the energy split down the spine of the auditorium like a fault line opening beneath legacy and truth. But it wasn't just the people inside the room who felt it. Outside, the world had already begun to burn. Within 30 seconds, the clip of Jasmine confronting Clint had hit Twitter. Within 5 minutes, it was trending in multiple states, and within the hour, it had fractured the internet in half. The conversation didn't simmer, it exploded. Hashtags flared across platforms like wildfires. Binara let her speak, Shar, Crockett vs. Clint, Ichan, truth over legends. But just as quickly came the backlash, sharp and immediate, like a hand slamming a door shut. "She went too far. He's a legend. Who the hell does she think she is? He built the America she now stands on and tears down in the same breath." Posts like these poured in from every direction, burning with nostalgia, pride, and fury. On conservative forums and in celebrity comment sections, the narrative was rewritten in real time. Jasmine wasn't brave. She was disrespectful. She wasn't bold. She was opportunistic. She hadn't challenged the legacy. She had tried to destroy it. People posted photos of Clint from Gran Torino and Dirty Harry, overlaying them with phrases like, "Real men don't flinch and you don't get to judge him." On talk radio and cable news, pundits scrambled to defend him, calling Jasmine's speech a public ambush, a grandstanding stunt, a performance masquerading as principle. Her resume was dragged, her intentions questioned, her tone dissected with surgical cruelty. She's never directed a film. She's never fought in a war. She's never had to carry a legacy like his. As if truth required trophies to be valid. As if experience could only be counted in years lived, not pain survived. But this wasn't just criticism. It was containment. It was the world trying to shrink her back into silence, using the same language that had kept women quiet for decades. Too emotional, too aggressive, too much. The double standard bled through every thread. Men in power could shout, curse, rage on live television and be called authentic. But when Jasmine Crockett spoke with calm, pointed clarity, she was called dangerous, divisive, ungrateful. They told her she should be thankful to even be on that stage, thankful to share it with a man who had done so much for American cinema. As if the opportunity to stand beside a myth should be reward enough. As if truth wasn't something you delivered when it was comfortable, but swallowed when it wasn't. Meanwhile, in private messages and public threads, the attacks grew darker. Old photos were dug up, her voting record questioned, her wardrobe analyzed, her hair, her voice, her body, nothing was off limits. One post read, "You'll never be remembered the way he is, and that's what kills you." Another said, "If Sandra Locke had a problem, she should have said something back then." And the cruelest ones pretended to be fair, cloaked in fake civility. She made some good points, but she should have chosen another time, another place, not there, not then. But that was the point. There was no other time. There was no other place. And Jasmine knew it. She had struck when the armor was thickest, because that's where myths are protected, and that's also where they're most vulnerable. Jasmine didn't respond. Not immediately, not emotionally. She didn't tweet back. She didn't go live. She didn't fire off a monologue. Instead, she sat in the quiet of her office that night, watching the storm swirl from the outside. She had known it would come, not because she was naive, but because she was experienced. This wasn't her first time being told she was out of line, simply for speaking inside a room that had never expected her voice. It was just the loudest. Her team offered to draft a statement. She told them no, not yet, because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do, after detonating the room, is to let the silence speak for itself, while the world decides whether to hear the echo or erase it. Still, the fight wasn't only online. Cable networks split along fault lines. One primetime host called her a threat to tradition. Another said she had the moral clarity of a generation sick of pretending. Legends don't cast shadows. Opinion columns titled "The Fall of Civility" ran alongside others titled "The Rise of Truth." Even Hollywood weighed in. Some actors and directors praised her courage, quietly, in cryptic posts or vague, "We stand with all voices" statements. Others remained silent. The Academy released a one-sentence comment: "We support the celebration of legacy and the courage of those who challenge it." It pleased no one, because this wasn't just about a speech. It was about something older, something raw. The untouchable veneer of masculinity, shaken. The golden armor of a cinematic god, chipped in public by someone who wasn't supposed to hold the hammer. And still, they asked, who is she to do this? That question echoed louder than any headline. Not what did she say, not was it true, but who is she to say it? As if truth needed permission, as if justice needed a pedigree, as if courage needed credentials signed by the very hands it had to stand against. It was the same question hurled at women who came forward too late, at whistleblowers who never had power, at citizens who stood alone before empires. And every time it's asked, it reveals not the speaker's ignorance, but their fear. Fear that power is shifting. Fear that memory might one day belong to the bold, not the beloved. Jasmine Crockett had not asked for this war, but she had walked into it with her eyes open. And now the battle was everywhere, not just in sound bites and hashtags, but in living rooms, classrooms, boardrooms. Parents talked to daughters, film professors rewrote lecture notes, voters reevaluated who they called strong. Clint Eastwood remained silent. His team released no statement. His defenders insisted silence was dignity. But Jasmine knew better. Sometimes silence is dignity, sometimes it's strategy, and sometimes it's fear. The kind of fear that only rises when truth, for the first time, speaks without asking permission. But while one half of the internet tried to bury her voice beneath nostalgia and reverence, the other half was doing something else entirely. It was listening, and not just listening, but responding, rising, refusing to let her words be steamrolled by tradition. As the backlash against Jasmine swelled, so did the surge of support. It started with a few quiet retweets, a clipped quote with no commentary. If I stay silent now, I'm betraying every woman who was told to shut up and smile for 60 years. Then came the essays, long, unapologetic threads from film critics, historians, and survivors. She didn't break the tribute, one writer posted. She broke the silence that's protected it. Another added, Jasmine Crockett didn't say anything new. She just said it where the lights were brightest. And that was the point. That was the danger. Because Jasmine hadn't just touched a nerve. She'd pressed her hand against a scar that Hollywood had spent decades covering with glitter and golden statues. Supporters didn't mince words. She didn't ruin the moment. She revealed what was rotting underneath it. You're mad because she didn't play by the rules. But the rules were written to protect the wrong people. These weren't trolls or political plants. They were directors, editors, women who worked in makeup trailers and lighting crews, Black actresses who never got the call back, writers who were told their scripts didn't have universal appeal. Their voices were raw, direct, and electric, and they all echoed one central truth. Jasmine wasn't out of line. The line itself was the problem. One viral post showed a split-screen image. On one side, Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, holding a gun. The words, "Are you feeling lucky, punk?" beneath him. On the other, Jasmine at the podium, back straight, eyes sharp, the words, "I'm not here for luck, I'm here for justice." It got 2.3 million likes in 12 hours. In the comments, people began sharing their own stories, not just about Hollywood, but about every place where silence had been the rule. A woman wrote, "I worked on 2 Eastwood sets. I saw how women were treated. I've never said it publicly until now." A producer tweeted, "We all knew about Sandra Locke. We all knew. And we stayed quiet. Jasmine didn't." Universities began adding Jasmine's speech to their ethics and media courses within a week. Film schools hosted emergency panels. When truth interrupts the legend, the Crockett-Eastwood debate. Professors posed new questions. Can a legacy survive the full weight of truth? Is silence ever neutral? Students, especially women and people of color, spoke up in class with a new kind of authority, not just quoting Jasmine's words, but using them. They weren't watching history unfold, they were joining it. Some even changed their senior projects overnight. One film major wrote, "I was going to make a short film about old school heroism. Now I'm making one about who got left behind." Jasmine's face, once rarely seen in these spaces, became a symbol, not of controversy, of confrontation, the righteous kind. And Hollywood took notice, quietly at first, then louder. A well-known actress posted, "I wish I had Jasmine's courage 20 years ago." A screenwriter revealed that a producer once told her to remove a female character's monologue because Clint would never like that energy. She added, "Now I keep it in, for Jasmine." At the same time, major studios began issuing vague statements about re-examining how we honor legacies. It was PR spin, but it was also fear. Not of Jasmine personally, but of the power she'd activated. She had cracked something open that couldn't be resealed. Because Jasmine hadn't just spoken truth to power, she'd done it in front of the world, and she hadn't blinked. And this was the real threat. Not the content of her words, but the clarity of them. The calm, the control, the refusal to apologize for taking up space in a room that was never meant for her. Her critics called her emotional. But what rattled them was her discipline, her ability to speak from pain without breaking, to deliver a surgical strike with composure, to smile just enough to say, "I know you expected a storm, but what you're getting is judgment." And the people who had been waiting for someone, anyone, to say these things in the open, they recognized it immediately, not as disruption, as deliverance. People began making art about it, paintings, poems, short films, spoken word pieces. One painting showed Jasmine standing in front of a cracked Hollywood sign, her reflection made of all the women who had never gotten to speak. Another piece simply titled "She Didn't Bow" was shared over 500,000 times. In schools and living rooms, on stages and online, people began saying her name not as a headline, but as a signal, a shift, a beginning. Not because she had destroyed a legacy, but because she had made space for others to build new ones. Legacies that didn't require silence to stand tall. And the question that had haunted the first wave of backlash, who is she to say this, was now being answered not by Jasmine, but by a chorus of others. She is the one who finally did. That was all that mattered. And for many, that was everything. Because while the old world scrambled to protect its myths, Jasmine Crockett had quietly begun building something stronger. A truth no longer afraid of the microphone, no longer willing to wait backstage, and no longer asking permission to be heard. And while the internet still churned with fury, admiration, and fire, Jasmine Crockett did something few expected. She didn't retreat. She didn't vanish into press statements, nor did she lower her voice to meet the comfort of the crowd. Instead, she stepped into the lion's den of national conversation. Just days after the firestorm, Jasmine sat down with 60 Minutes. It wasn't a polished fluff piece. It wasn't a staged apology tour. It was an unflinching interview, filmed under the kind of lighting that shows everything: creases, weariness, resolve. The room was spare, cold-toned, clinical, but Jasmine's presence was anything but. In a midnight blue blazer, her hair pinned neatly, eyes alert, she faced the camera like it was a jury she had waited years to address. And when the interviewer asked, "Why now? Why there? Why him?" she didn't blink. She spoke slowly at first, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted every word to land exactly where it was meant to. "I didn't come to that stage to start a war," she said, "but I'm not afraid of what war it started." Her voice carried the cadence of truth wrapped in restraint, the kind of tone that makes people lean forward in their chairs. "People say I ruined a tribute," she continued, "but what are we really honoring if we can't tell the whole story?" Then she paused, locking eyes with the interviewer, and through the camera, the nation. "Sometimes," she said, "to protect America's legacy, we have to face the darkest parts of it. We don't honor the truth by hiding from it. We honor it by surviving it, by exposing it, and by saying, this will not be forgotten." The silence that followed wasn't filler. It was space, a deliberate break in a world addicted to noise. Jasmine leaned in slightly, the edge of her hand resting on her knee, the camera pulling just close enough to feel like you were in the room with her. "Do you know what I didn't see in Clint Eastwood's films?" she asked. "People like me, not strong, not whole, not leading. I didn't see black women unless we were background. I didn't see our voices unless we were broken. I didn't see power unless it belonged to a gun or a white man." Her words weren't angry. They were clinical, carved from data and memory. And people will say, "Well, that was the time." And to them, I say, whose time? Whose story? Who got to live and who only got to bleed? She didn't shout. She didn't falter. But her voice carried the full weight of generations. "I come from a place where the stories we were handed told us who we weren't," she continued. "We weren't heroes. We weren't saviors. We weren't main characters. And then you grow up and realize that wasn't just a coincidence. That was a choice." The interviewer leaned in, visibly caught off guard by her clarity. "Are you saying Clint Eastwood made that choice?" he asked. Jasmine didn't look away. "I'm saying the industry made it, over and over. And Clint, he played his part. He profited from it. He became a symbol of it. And symbols don't get to escape accountability just because they've been around long enough to gather dust." She took a breath, controlled even, and then delivered the line that would circle the globe within hours. "You don't get to shape the story of America," she said, "and then silence the people you left out of it." The camera held on her face, still, unblinking. She wasn't performing. She was reporting. Reporting a truth no award show had ever dared script. "Hollywood has told this country who its heroes are for nearly a century," she added. "And if those heroes were made by erasing black voices, by reducing women to footnotes, by silencing pain and calling it grit, then I think it's time we question the definition of hero altogether. Viewers across the country sat stunned, not just because she was sharp, but because she was unshakable. The screen wasn't filled with tears or outbursts. It was filled with control. The kind that doesn't scream because it doesn't have to. The kind that says, I am done asking to be heard. Now I will be impossible to ignore. And for many watching, especially women of color, it was a moment they'd waited their whole lives to see. Not because they wanted revenge, but because they wanted recognition. Recognition that their absence from history wasn't accidental, that the missing stories were never lost, they were excluded. The interviewer tried to pivot. But can't we separate art from the artist? He asked. Jasmine smiled, but not kindly. People only ask that when the artist is someone they admire, she replied. You want me to honor his legacy? Then I have to confront what that legacy cost. You don't get to write a chapter of American mythology and then ask the rest of us not to read it too closely. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't soften either. I'm not canceling him. I'm contextualizing him. And maybe that's what this country fears the most. Truth with context. The interview ended not with a bow, but with a pulse. The network cut to commercial, but the internet didn't. Within minutes, clips of her appearance lit up every platform. Activists shared it. Filmmakers quoted it. Educators bookmarked it. We don't honor the truth by hiding from it became the line that defined the week. People printed it on posters, pinned it to classroom doors, whispered it in board meetings where the temperature suddenly shifted. And Jasmine? She went home, quietly. No after party, no follow-up press conference. She didn't need to chase the moment because the moment was now chasing her. And for the first time in a long time, a different kind of legacy began to take shape. Not one built on the denial of pain, but on the dignity of facing it head-on. Jasmine Crockett had walked into a tribute she was expected to decorate, and instead, she demanded that the mirror be turned toward the room itself. And when it did, when America saw its reflection, it didn't like what it saw, but it couldn't look away, not anymore. And just as Jasmine's 60 Minutes interview ignited new waves of dialogue across the country, something no one anticipated happened. Others began to speak. Not pundits, not politicians, women. Women who had been there. Women who had stood behind Clint Eastwood on movie sets for years, dressed in costumes designed to be peeled off, reciting lines written to be interrupted, existing in stories built for someone else's arc. Their silence, once stitched together by fear and contracts, began to fray. And when it did, it didn't unravel quietly. It tore open with the weight of truth long overdue. It started with a tweet, then an interview, then a press release. One by one, names the industry had almost forgotten stepped forward, no longer alone. The first was Michelle Landon, a supporting actress in Bloodline and The Hollow West, who had kept her head down for nearly 20 years. She wrote, I never thought I'd say this out loud, but Jasmine Crockett gave me the courage. I worked with Clint. I remember the moment he told the director, she's not here to think. She's here to make him feel something. Don't let her get in the way of the male arc. The tweet went viral in under 2 hours. The quote, cut, copied, memed, landed like a confession ripped from the heart of the industry itself. She's not here to think. 7 words that revealed decades of unspoken policy. Then came Talia Monroe, a 2-time Golden Globe nominee who had starred in one of Eastwood's lesser-known political thrillers in the early 2000s. Her voice had always been gentle, almost apologetic in interviews, but now it was razor-sharp. In a sit-down with The Hollywood Reporter, she said, he told me during a reshoot that my crying scene was too sharp. His word. He said, don't cry like that. That kind of pain doesn't help him. Your job is to soften the scene, not challenge it. She looked into the camera and added, it stayed with me for years. I started asking myself if my grief, even in fiction, needed to be palatable to men. The clip spread across every platform within the hour, and for the first time, the air around Clint's legacy didn't feel untouchable. It felt interrogated. The third came quietly but shook the room harder than the rest. It was Evelyn Hart, now 62, who had played a nurse in one of Eastwood's most celebrated films, A small role, but one with real depth. Or it had depth until, as she revealed, Clint personally cut 3 of her scenes, telling the screenwriter, "She's getting too much focus. This isn't about her, it's about the soldier." Evelyn never said a word about it publicly until now. She posted a photo of the original script next to the revised one, the red ink notes still legible decades later. Beneath it she wrote, "I was erased because my character had too much truth." Jasmine Crockett brought that memory back. And this time, I won't let it die in silence. The impact was immediate and electric. These weren't just testimonials. They were time bombs buried in the foundation of Eastwood's legend, finally surfacing. Networks scrambled. PR teams panicked. Some tried to spin the quotes as taken out of context, but the tone had shifted. This wasn't a smear campaign. It was a reckoning. For every one woman who spoke, there were 100 who nodded silently behind their screens, remembering, hurting, watching the world finally catch up to something they had always known but never dared say. And through it all, Jasmine stayed quiet. Not because she had nothing to add, but because she knew she didn't need to say another word. The truth was no longer hers alone to carry. It was spreading, faster than denial, deeper than legacy, louder than scripted tributes. The phrase, "she's not here to think," became a rallying cry, plastered on protest signs, printed on t-shirts, shouted from stages. And every time it was repeated, it wasn't just an indictment of Eastwood. It was a mirror held up to every man, every system, every structure that had ever treated women as scenery in a story they were born to lead. Late-night hosts tried to joke about it. Some failed. Others fell silent. One called it, "the moment Hollywood stopped pretending its gods were flawless." Film schools rewrote syllabi. Directors pulled clips from DVDs. The mythos was still there, but it was no longer safe. It had been touched. And in a town built on illusion, that single touch can make the entire set wobble. Eastwood himself didn't respond, but insiders whispered that meetings were being held, reputations recalibrated, legacy tours postponed. Meanwhile, Jasmine walked into Congress that week the same way she always had, head high, voice steady. Reporters shouted questions. She offered a single sentence. "This isn't about one man. It's about 1,000 silences ending at once." And that was all. Because sometimes the loudest sound in the world is a door finally being opened from the inside. And for women watching everywhere, especially those who had been told to smile, to soften, to disappear, it wasn't just Jasmine they were applauding now. It was each other. It was themselves. And for the first time in a very long time, they didn't just feel like part of the audience. They felt like the ones holding the pen. And as stories piled up, each one sharper, more personal, more undeniable, the spotlight at last turned back to the man at the center of the storm. For days, Clint Eastwood had been silent. Not the proud, cinematic kind of silence he'd mastered on screen, but the uncertain human kind that flickers behind closed doors when the script runs out. The press followed him like shadow. Outside restaurants, near his ranch, on the way to closed-door meetings. Everyone had the same question. "Do you deny what they're saying?" Cameras zoomed, microphones swarmed. News anchors waited for the moment he would finally defend himself. But when Clint did speak, it wasn't the fierce rebuttal some had hoped for or feared. It happened during a quiet walk to his car after a charity event in Carmel. A reporter, low in tone but direct, asked, "Mr. Eastwood, how do you respond to the allegations from former co-stars about your treatment of women on set?" Clint paused mid-step. He didn't look angry. He didn't look broken. He just looked tired. His hand rested on the edge of the car door, and for a second the world seemed to slow, waiting, listening. Then he turned, face caught between the shadow of a street lamp and the flash of a camera. And he said simply, "I'm old. And this time we're in, it's not mine anymore." He said it like a man admitting to something heavier than guilt, displacement. That sentence hit like a fault line cracking open beneath both sides of the war. For his defenders, it was a bitter pill. The cowboy, the gunslinger, the man who once stared down the system, now acknowledging that he was no longer the center of it. To others, it was something closer to surrender. Not an apology, not accountability, but concession. The myth was no longer in control of the narrative. It couldn't shout down the new voices or frame itself in golden light. Clint had looked into the wave and stepped aside, not proudly, not humbly, but quietly. And that quiet shook more deeply than defiance ever could. Some saw the statement as wisdom, others as evasion, but no one could deny its weight. Newsrooms played the clip on loop. Editorials emerged overnight, some calling it the most honest thing Eastwood ever said, others accusing him of shrinking from the reckoning he helped create. On social media, the quote took on a life of its own. This time we're in, "It's not mine anymore," became a Rorschach test. Was it a farewell, a confession, or just the final line of a man whose scripts had always given him the last word? But for Jasmine Crockett and the women who had stood with her, it wasn't the end. It wasn't even closure. It was a moment of recognition, not for him, but for them. For decades, they had been told that their time hadn't come, that they were ahead of the culture, too sensitive, not seasoned enough. Now the line had flipped. Now he was the one watching the world move without asking his permission. And maybe that, in the end, was the most cinematic truth of all. No matter how long you hold the frame, time always finds a way to break through. And in the wake of Clint's quiet, sobering admission, this time isn't mine anymore. Hollywood, ever desperate for narrative closure, did what it always does. It staged a redemption scene. A month later, a prestigious film gala in Los Angeles, billed as a night to celebrate cinema across generations, was quietly repositioned as the moment of healing. Organizers, studio heads, and PR strategists whispered behind closed doors, plotting what they called a bridge moment, a carefully crafted scene where Jasmine Crockett and Clint Eastwood would share the stage, exchange a symbolic handshake, and assure the world that the past had been acknowledged, the future embraced, and the present managed. Jasmine was invited with all the trappings of diplomacy: private car, velvet seating, spotlighted table between Academy legends. But Clint declined the invitation. No explanation, no statement, just absence. And that absence said more than any script could. The room, packed with industry giants and cameras itching for a shot of reconciliation, buzzed with expectation as Jasmine arrived alone. Dressed in striking deep gold, she stood out, not just for what she wore, but for what she carried: composure, history, and the knowledge that every step she took was across a floor still cracking beneath her heels. When the time came for her to speak, the MC kept it vague. And now Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, whose recent voice in the industry has sparked important conversations, will offer a few words. Polite applause, careful, diplomatic. But all eyes were watching, waiting, hoping maybe that she would smooth the edges, offer grace, reframe the storm as a misunderstanding between generations. Jasmine stepped to the podium, slow, deliberate, no notes in hand. She scanned the audience, saw the cameras, the tension, the expectation, and then she spoke, not with fire, but with gravity. "I know many of you were hoping for a moment tonight," she said, her voice even, her gaze unwavering. "A moment of forgiveness, a handshake, something that makes us all feel better." The room fell utterly still. "But I didn't come here for that. I don't need a photo. I don't need a headline. And I sure as hell don't need a handshake." Her tone sharpened, not angry, but exact. "What I need, what we need, is a reckoning, a real one, not just for what was said to me, but for what was done to an entire generation of women, of people of color, of storytellers whose lives were lived off-screen because someone decided they didn't fit the vision." Her voice grew firmer and her shoulders squared. "You want reconciliation? Start with truth. Start with accountability. Because I'm not standing here alone. I'm standing with the actresses who were told to smile through scenes they didn't believe in. I'm standing with the screenwriters whose names were erased. I'm standing with the audience members who never saw themselves as the hero because someone else decided they couldn't be." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some with awe, others discomfort, but no one looked away. No one could. Jasmine let the silence linger, then drove the blade home with calm force. "So no, I don't need Clint Eastwood to shake my hand. I need him and this industry to say the one thing that's never been said out loud in a room like this. She paused, her eyes sweeping the faces frozen before her. I'm sorry. The word hung like thunder, waiting to land. Not to me, she added. To the ones who were silenced, to the ones who were written out, to the ones who died waiting for a role that never came because someone thought America only looked one way. Her voice never wavered. It didn't need to. She wasn't asking for power. She was exposing it. And then she stepped back. No bow, no smile, just clarity. The applause didn't come all at once. It came in waves, like people checking to see if it was safe to agree. But it grew. Louder. Real. No one had gotten the neat conclusion they'd hoped for. Instead, they got something far more dangerous. They got truth with no compromise. A woman refusing to decorate the lie. A story that didn't end in forgiveness, but in unfinished business. And as Jasmine's words echoed through the auditorium, refusing the handshake and demanding something deeper, more honest, something irreversible began to shift far beyond the glitz of the gala. What had started as a single confrontation now rippled outward, into classrooms, into boardrooms, into the very institutions that had built the canon of American cinema. Film museums, universities, and cultural foundations across the country began revisiting the sacred shelves where classic was once synonymous with untouchable. Suddenly, nothing felt safe from scrutiny, not even the icons that had defined an entire era of Hollywood. At the American Film Institute in Los Angeles, what was supposed to be a retrospective called The Grit of Eastwood was quietly rebranded. Flyers disappeared overnight. In their place, a new banner, Legacy and Blindness, Who Gets to Tell the Story? Panels were added, speakers shifted. Jasmine Crockett's speech was projected onto the lobby wall as part of a rotating installation. Students stopped to read, not as spectators, but as participants in a debate that had now spilled into their own artistic futures. Across the country, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History paused the renewal of its Western cinema exhibit. Curators met behind closed doors, arguing not about facts, but what kind of silence counts as complicity. In film departments from New York University to University of California, Los Angeles, professors updated syllabi. Clint Eastwood's films weren't deleted, but they were reframed, contextualized, discussed beside the voices they once omitted. Some universities, including historically black colleges and smaller liberal arts institutions, removed certain Eastwood films from required screenings, citing their exclusionary narratives and dated power structures. Meanwhile, others defended his work fiercely. One Midwestern school doubled down, naming a new film theory hall after Eastwood, calling him a reflection of America's complex spirit. The conflict wasn't just academic, it was national. Op-eds exploded across the ideological spectrum. The New York Times ran a headline that read, "Can we love a legend and still hold him accountable?" In the Atlantic, Jasmine Crockett and the New Age of Artistic Reckoning. Fox News aired nightly segments decrying the canceling of cowboy culture, while the nation applauded what they called the long-overdue truth audit of American masculinity. On podcasts, on talk shows, on dinner tables, everyone had something to say. But no one could agree on where to draw the line between art and harm, between honoring and ignoring. The phrase "disanva trachnihim," legacy and responsibility, surfaced so often it felt like a drumbeat behind every broadcast. And in the middle of it all stood Jasmine, not shouting, not tweeting, just present. A living symbol of the question no one could escape anymore. What do we do with the stories we were told to revere, once we realize who they left behind? She didn't demand erasure. She demanded memory, with context, with accountability, with the courage to ask who paid the price for every golden frame. The storm didn't end. It evolved. And for the first time in decades, Hollywood wasn't just watching history unfold. It was being dragged into it, scene by scene, frame by frame, voice by voice. And as the national conversation raged on, across op-eds, campuses, talk shows, and museum halls, a different kind of voice emerged, smaller, softer, but no less powerful. A single envelope, hand-addressed in careful pink cursive, arrived at Jasmine Crockett's congressional office in Washington. No return address, just a name in the corner. Amari, age 10, Houston, Texas. Inside was a short letter, scrawled in uneven lines, with words that didn't need polish to strike like lightning. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, it began, I saw you on TV. I watched what you said, even when the adults told me I was too young to understand. But I did understand. You didn't just stand up for you. You stood up for me. You made me think maybe one day I can stand up too, and not be told I'm too sensitive, or too little, or that I talk too much. Thank you. The paper was wrinkled at the corners. A sticker of a gold star was pressed beside her signature. Jasmine read it in silence, sitting alone at her desk beneath the dome of the Capitol. In a week filled with headlines, firestorms, and cultural fault lines, this was what made her pause. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniably true. This, she thought, is the echo they never calculate when they try to silence you. The one that travels forward, not back. 2 days later, as the House convened for what was supposed to be a routine education funding hearing, Jasmine rose from her seat. The room was full, some distracted, some scrolling, others waiting to pounce. But when she pulled the pink letter from her folder and said, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read a letter from a constituent, the air changed. Her voice, calm but firm, filled the chamber. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I saw you on TV. You made me think maybe one day I can stand up too. She read every word, slowly, intentionally, letting each sentence settle into the velvet silence of the chamber like a stone dropped in water. And when she finished, she didn't sit. She looked up, eyes locked on her colleagues, some nodding, others glaring, many unreadable, and said, This is why we speak. Not for applause, not for war. For the ones who haven't been told yet that they're allowed to take up space. For the girls who are called too loud in classrooms. For the women who are told they're too angry in boardrooms. For the storytellers who were told their stories didn't sell. Her voice didn't rise, but her presence expanded, filling the chamber like a moral tide. I didn't come here to destroy anyone's legacy, she said, her final words cutting through marble and memory like a blade made of truth. I came to open the door for legacies that were never given a name. No applause followed, none was allowed, but the silence was louder than any ovation. Because in that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't debating policy. She was rewriting history in real time with a little girl's letter in her hand and generations watching through the cracks of doors once locked tight. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.